Whatever the occasion, effortless elegance is right this way. Because Hilton brings you new ways to stay courtesy of the Nomad London. And it doesn't stop at award-winning dining in a space draped in velvet and illuminated by vintage chandeliers. No, this day goes beyond with unparalleled personalized service and attentive hospitality. Oh, and did we mention the Nomad London can be booked using your Hilton Honors points at Hilton.com? Hilton, for the stay.
So, you just started using LinkedIn Premium. Now what? Well, on your premium company page, you noticed around 7.5 times more page engagement and 5 times more page views. Well done. And now, new clients are messaging you. All because you're using LinkedIn Premium, which helps you get the business growth you want. Think big, small business. Think big. Start your free trial at linkedin.com/premium small business. That's linkedin.com/premium small business.
The new McCrispy Strip is here. Dip approved by ketchup, tangy barbecue, honey mustard, Sprite, McFlurry, Big Mac sauce, double dipped in buffalo and ranch, more ranch, and creamy chili McCrispy Strip Dip. Now at McDonald's. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
You must go on. I can't go on. You must go on. I'll go on. You must say words, as long as there are any, until they find me, until they say me. Strange pain, strange sin. You must go on. Perhaps it's done already. Perhaps they have set me already. Perhaps they have carried me to the threshold of my story. Before the door that opens on my story, that would surprise me. If it opens, it would be I. It would be the silence. Where I am, I don't know. I'll never know. In the silence, you don't know. You must go on. I can't go on. I'll go on.
Well, who knew Harold Pinter would launch his own podcast? In the future, everyone will be a mouth talking in the void.
I can't go on. I'll go on.
Hello, and welcome to Backlisted, the podcast which gives new life to old books. Today, you find me in the dark. I can't move. I'm curled up inside some kind of jar, dim, intermittent light. People pass before me. At least, I think they do. I can hear my own voice. If it is my own voice, in the silence, if it is silence, all I can do is go on, but I can't go on. I must go on. I'll go on. I'm John Mitchinson, the publisher of Unbound, where people crowdfund the books they really want to read.
I feel like you've desecrated something there. Well done. And I'm Andy Miller, the author of The Year of Reading Dangerously.
And I'm Nicky Birch, and I'm the editor of Backlisted.
Hooray! And today's episode, which is our 199th, is dedicated entirely to the work of one writer, and if you haven't already guessed, his name was Samuel Beckett. There are no guests this time, but over the course of the next hour, the three of us will discuss, read from, and listen to 5 of Beckett's works that we feel give a representative sweep of his long career. And rather as we did with our episode on Graham Greene, we'll cover some of Beckett's writing that isn't as well known and some of his writing that is extremely famous. John, when, where, how, why did you first encounter the writing of Samuel Beckett?
I think I was actually 15, 16, but a teenager in New Zealand at school in Auckland, and I went to a brilliant production of Krapp's Last Tape and Not I at Theatre Corp, a small theatre company in Auckland. And you have those moments in the theatre that completely transform the way you think about what's possible. Krapp, obviously, one man and a tape machine. We're going to be talking about Krapp later on. Not I, a mouth, an illuminated mouth in the middle of the stage, a monologue. And I suppose after that, I was kind of, I was hooked, and I read as much about and by Beckett as I could. As we'll discover, some of that is quite difficult. Some of it is also incredibly powerful, moving, and funny.
So, as in our Graham Greene episode, we have divided the roles the three of us will play, like a Beckett play. So, John is the talking head in the dark.
The expert.
The expert.
Oh, Lord, yes.
I am someone who has read the hits, such as Waiting for Godot and Krapp's Last Tape, which I love. and The Unnamable, which we'll be talking about in a bit. And Nicky is, Nicky, how would you describe your role today?
So honestly, if someone has used the phrase, that's very Beckettian, I have no idea what that means. Prior to doing this, obviously my extensive research for this episode, but I have seen one Beckett play back in 1991. I saw Rick Mayall and Adrian Edmondson doing Waiting for Godot.
Oh, nice though. Nice. Well, we must discuss that because I saw Sir Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart doing Waiting for Godot.
Wow.
So, and I'm sure John has seen.
Yeah, I mean,
many.
I think one of the things about Beckett is that it's such an incredible, the 20th century alone, the performances of Godot and the great plays, is some of the greatest actors, obviously. So there's a lot to choose from, and we've got some nice clips as well to play.
Because this is episode 199, and it's just the three of us. Before we get on to Samuel Beckett, Beckett is coming in, I reckon, about 5 to 10 minutes' time. This is the first time the three of us have been in a room together for 6 months. And we used to get together all the time, didn't we? And then the pandemic happened, and we're like a band in the late stages of its career where one of them moves to America and has to fly in for rehearsals.
That's you.
That's me, yeah, right. So we wanted to talk a little bit first about how it feels after 8 years to have made 200 episodes of this podcast. Yeah. And John has chosen 5 magnificent examples of Beckett's work, 5 texts. And I have laboriously worked out how each one of them connects to a different moment in Backlisted history. Right. So if you'll indulge us as we indulge ourselves a bit. John, I was thinking about on the way down here today, what would you have done with the last 8 years if you hadn't been making this?
No, it's
less reading.
Yeah.
How?
Fewer books, for sure. In fact, I genuinely think it's completely changed the way I look at the history of literature now. I feel like I've had a massive kind of blood transfusion, and I've ended up with a different perspective on not just on writing, but on the way the kind of the canon, the whole relationship between a writer's work and their life. It's been one of the most formative, important experiences of my life, I have to say.
I feel exactly the same way. I mean, I feel like the listeners have been terribly patient as they heard us learn on the job. Not just how to make the shows, but actually, when I consider some of the subjects, authors or books that we've taken on, we had that kind of fearlessness that came from, we didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know what we were letting ourselves in for. The fact we feel confident enough to sit here and have a 3-way discussion of Samuel Beckett.
Which I can't believe I'm involved in.
Well, that's all part of the fun of it, right? That's the energy of it. So John, I feel the impact on my reading, how I read, the way I read, has been changed forever by doing Backlisted. Yeah. But my experience over the last year or so is also that it has changed the way I write completely.
In what way?
I feel the benefit of having read approximately 1,500 books in the time we've been doing this podcast. It's not really that difficult. If you read week in, week out, some of the greatest exponents of the written word, you pick up a few tips.
Yep. That's a really good point. I mean, I think it seeps into your sense of pace and tone, and no doubt, I feel I'm a much better writer than I was 8 years ago.
Nicky, though, right? You joined us how many years in?
I'm like the Ronnie Wood.
I was just thinking, in so many ways.
In so many ways.
Did you join us about 3 years in?
Yes,
you've been with us
5 years.
5 years. How has this changed your life, or hasn't it?
Oh no, I think it has. Actually, my partner was laughing at me last week, saying, "I can't believe you're watching Krapp's last take in the bath." I mean,
good.
That's a transformation. No, but I mean, in all seriousness, I was a reader as a child and a teenager, and I stopped reading. Stopped, not kind of completely, but nowhere near the amount the amount of pleasure I get out of it now. So transformational in that, but also I now will approach books that I never would because I want to be part of the conversation on Backlisted. I also have very much you in my mind, Andy, which is finish the book.
Sorry.
No, but it really helps. And so sometimes it's a struggle, but I will always finish the book. And I really enjoy that. Do you know what I mean? I will plow through books that I find difficult. And I also, and I approach it. And I know sometimes I find it easier to listen because that's sometimes certain books are easier listening, but it's completely changed what I read. And it's completely changed my ability to talk about things. I wouldn't have had the confidence to talk about them either.
That is really interesting.
One of my one of the other things I feel that I have had confirmed by the experience of being involved with Backlisted is I can remember, I'm sure I've said this on the podcast before, but I can remember Salman Rushdie saying once, you have to get out of this trap of thinking the world is full of bad books that have been written to waste your time. It's just not true. That there are very few great books and there are very few really bad books. And there are an awful lot of good books. Books that if you read them with an open mind, you'll take something away from. You know,
and that is one of the beautiful things about this, isn't it? That there are books that you guys have talked about on this show, which maybe we'll come on to in a quiz later in this show to sort of showcase some of those old books, but that you have perhaps not always liked retrospectively, but you have found something in all of them so that has value. And you've been positive and really made people feel like this is the great thing about this book.
Yeah.
And I think it's the passion and energy and enthusiasm you both share for books.
Well, John,
appealing.
I think one of the misconceptions about Backlisted is that we're here to sell books. I mean, we like selling books, especially through the bookshop.org, because that helps us keep going. But we were doing an interview last week and we were talking about on that, weren't we, with Eric? We were saying on that, I know it's a good show when I get to the end and think, brilliant. People who hear this are going to read this book, not buy this book, read this book, read this book, you know?
And I think that process of us, it's an amazing thing to have to get your thoughts into some kind of order and to communicate those, hopefully, kind of cogently. That's not how a lot of people read, It's not how I read. I used to do that, I suppose, when I was a student. But unless you were reviewing a book, you read and you go on to the next one. But what I've really welcomed is that added layer of trying to think about how you communicate what you've read, what the impact the book has had on you, why it might be of interest to other people. And I think that in a way, I almost feel that is habit forming. I read, as you say, differently, and I write differently. But I also think differently now. When I'm reading a book, I think I'm also at the same time wondering what I'm going to say about it. So,
well, let's make 200 more of these.
I suppose.
Well, we're never going to run out.
I'll go on.
I'll go on. I can't go on. I'll go on.
No, but it is thanks to people listening, isn't it, that we've carried on, and therefore we've got this great benefit of being able to read and enjoy all these books.
Amazing group of listeners.
People listen to this. What? I thought this was just for fun.
It's such a the Patreon community is they're incredible people. They're very, very. It's very reassuring. Very, very, very positive.
Before we move on to the main event, then, I want you to think for a moment. I will go first to give you some thinking time. Which one book, doesn't have to be the subject of an episode, which one book that you wouldn't have read if it wasn't for doing this is the book you will take away? When you think about Backlisted, what is the book you think of? What's the book that springs to mind? Shall I go first?
Go on.
I don't think I would have read, there are books that I've enjoyed more, but I don't think I would have read Something Happened by Joseph Heller, which I can still feel the in the pit of my stomach, the excitement of thinking that book is still on the shelves of bookshops, as I said in the show at the time. And I can remember, was it, I think you, John, reading something from it near the end of the recording and there being an almost hysterical sense of how transgressive it was, how funny, how brilliant, and how alive. What an extraordinary thing a book is when it lifts up off the page like that. So I think Something Happened by Joseph Heller is probably mine, even though there are books that I like more, enjoyed more, got more out of intellect. I don't know. It's just that's the lightning struck for me there.
It's a very tricky question, I have to say. I mean, there are so many that I could, off the top of my head.
You've got to choose one.
Yeah,
I know you.
I know I've got to choose one. I will choose one. I think.
Was it lightning rods?
It was lightning rods. No further questions.
I think that now I've got to choose one, and I've got to make it.
You know what?
I think.
I think hilarious to watch.
Huysmans. I think Arabur. I don't think I'd have ever read that book if we hadn't done it. And now it's a book that I think about. I probably think about that book once a week.
Against Nature by
Huysmans, and it was.
That was a lovely episode.
I mean, maybe there was a bit of that we were doing it in Shakespeare and Company in Paris, but I've read a lot. I've been turned on to lots of amazing women writers through Backlisted.
Mm-hmm.
But that one book. I mean, I can remember reading it and thinking, I can't believe I've not. Not only have I not read it, but I didn't know it was this good and this transgressive and this odd and mad.
Nicky,
I have got two. Sorry.
Well, go on.
Okay, because they both relate to me. They're ones I think about a lot. Maybe again, not the best books of the ones, but I work at the BBC, and so the Human Voices one.
By Penelope Fitzgerald.
Very good.
Which is all about the BBC during the war. I think about that a lot when I'm at work.
Does it still seem, in what way? Do you go to work and think the sort of fictional characters flit along the corridors?
I think about mostly them sleeping there during the bombing raids. And that's sort of, I kind of think, what was that like? And I just imagine, and one of the characters dies in a bomb, round the corner, and I can picture the street where it happened, and it just feels very kind of connected to me. And then the second one, which also feels connected to me, is Full Tilt by Dervla Murphy, which is the cycling
interesting.
one.
Right, okay.
Because I cycle quite a lot, but also the fact that she was just such this incredible machine, and she just was an absolute legend. And I think about how she managed that, and I sort of aspire to be a small amount of a cycling legend as she is.
I aspire to her method of having her phone on for, what was it, like on a Wednesday morning at 5 a.m. and that was it.
Exactly.
The rest of the time you couldn't get hold of her, which meant she could write instead.
I don't think I would have read either of those books had it been not for Backlisted. So that I think I'm more likely to pick up a book from the table at Waterstones. That would have been my kind of reading before Backlisted. And so now I'm, I feel like I've got to the point where I'm reading books that actually connect with me on a much greater level, thanks to you both. So. And the show.
The show.
That's great.
So how we're going to run this is John has chosen 5 books, plays, novels, collections of short stories, texts by Samuel Beckett for us. And he's going to announce for us each one. And then I am going to offer my interpretation of why he has chosen that book in relation to the history of Backlisted.
So the first in our Beckett series is an early essay, 1929. It appeared in a book that was dedicated to what was then known as Work in Progress. So it was called Our Examination Around His Factification for Incamination of Work in Progress. The Work in Progress was by James Joyce, and it was the book that became Finnegan's Wake. And it was published, this book was published by Shakespeare and Company. They used to call it Our Exag. And the first essay in it was an essay by precocious young writer called Samuel Beckett, Dante Bruno, Vico Joyce.
Right. Now, you've already mentioned one way that ties in back into Backlisted, which is called Shakespeare and Company, bookshop in Paris. But also, I would go so far as to suggest John, that you chose that because on episodes 3 and 4 of Backlisted, in the now defunct What I've Been Reading This Week slots, 8 years ago, I was reading, about now in fact, I was reading Finnegan's Wake.
You were.
Yeah, all how many pages it is. But you can hear me, you can go back into the archive at backlisted.fm and hear me talking about the experience of both reading and finishing Finnegan's Wake in episodes 3 and 4, devoted to David Nobbs and Nancy Mitford, respectively. And I also will go so far as to suggest the reason why John has chosen Beckett's essay on Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce is because several times over the years on Backlisted, we have announced an episode on James Joyce and Ulysses that has repeatedly,
never done it.
repeatedly failed to materialise. And that is a clear reference by John to Samuel Beckett's play, Waiting for Godot.
Very good, Andy.
Very good, Andy. That's gold star there.
I think that's brilliant. So the reason I chose it is that the one thing I guess that people, if they know anything about Beckett, is that he worked as Joyce's secretary. He went to Paris. He was an A grade student. I mean, he got a gold medal for modern languages from Trinity College Dublin and went to teach in the École Normale Supérieure in Paris as teaching English.
This is in his 20s.
In his 20s. So absolutely and he was introduced by the predecessor in his job as a guy called Thomas McGreevy, who introduced him to Joyce. Joyce got on extremely well with Beckett and used him as a secretary. And two things came out of that. One, that Joyce's daughter, Lucia, fell in love with Beckett, and that was sort of unrequited, which is problematic. And she later, that's a whole other story, ended up in mental institution. But Beckett was heavily influenced by Joyce, and this group of essays was the first attempt critically to try and explain and defend Finnegan's Wake.
So we should say at this point that Beckett, as a pupil of Joyce, as Joyce's amanuensis. And pupil.
Yeah. What's amanuensis?
Sort of secretary, taking notes, doing research.
Right.
James Joyce's intern.
Okay.
Intern.
Executive assistant.
Yes, okay. Well, we should say that Beckett was thought to be a precociously talented as a reader and writer. He was perceived as someone who was going to do great things.
Yeah.
And his contemporaries and some of the older people around him felt, as it happened, when it happened, that the worst thing he ever did was fall under the influence of James Joyce.
Yeah.
Really fascinating, because Joyce then perhaps is not the Joyce we think of now. We struggle perhaps to understand portions of Finnegan's Wake nearly 100 years after it was composed. Imagine at the time when it was being published in literary journals, imagine how offensively avant-garde it must have seemed to so many of its readers. And I love this essay, John. I'd never read this essay before, almost because of the aggression in it.
Absolutely.
Beckett's passionate advocacy, not for, the more respectable things that people hoped he would recommend and talk about and discuss, but really leaning into the idea that you need to pay attention to what this man, James Joyce, is doing.
And he was, star student. His parents wanted him to be an academic. His dad was a quantity surveyor, a very upper middle class Dublin family, lived in a beautiful house. So there was a lot of expectation. He wasn't like Joyce. He didn't come from that sort of working class background. You talk about the combative thing. He goes in very early to say, must we wring the neck of a certain system in order to stuff it into a contemporary pigeonhole or modify the dimensions of that pigeonhole for the satisfaction of the analogy mongers? Literary criticism is not bookkeeping.
Literary criticism is not bookkeeping. That should be the Backlisted motto. We should go from here.
T-shirt from merch.
Well, let's go from here and all get it tattooed.
And I mean, without going into all the details of this, the other stuff he writes about, which is that the Vico, the great 17th century Italian philosopher, who had the idea of cycles of history were all interconnected and repeating one another. He uses that to try and explain the schema of what Joyce is doing. But there are little bits of the Beckett to come He says, once he's explained Vico's theory, he said, so much for the dry bones, the consciousness that there is a great deal of the unborn infant in the lifeless octogenarian and a great deal of both in the man at the apogee of his life's curve removes all the stiff inter-exclusiveness that is often the danger in neat construction. So you're beginning to see all very much there. And then he's amazing about the language in the book. And this is what he says about readers for the book, this is the bit that I think you respond to as well. On turning to the work in progress, we find the mirror is not so convex. Here is direct, in comparison to Vico, here is direct expression, pages and pages of it. And if you don't understand it, ladies and gentlemen, it's because you're too decadent to receive it. You are not satisfied unless form is so strictly divorced from content that you can comprehend the one almost without bothering to read the other. This rapid skimming and absorption of the scant cream of sense is made possible by what we may call a continuous process of copious intellectual salivation. The form that is an arbitrary and independent phenomenon can fulfill no higher function than that of stimulus for a tertiary or quarterly conditional reflex of dribbling comprehension. Anyway, the point is he's saying that Joyce's language is alive. This is the real thing. He says, he does this brilliant thing where he says, lex, a crop of acorns, ilex, tree that produces acorns, legere, to gather, aquilex, he that gathers the waters, lex, gathering together of peoples, public assembly, lex, law, legere, to gather together letters into a word to read. So you go from an acorn to reading, and he's saying that's what Joyce is doing. He's taking language back to its roots. And he says, here form is content is form. You complain that this stuff is not written in English. It is not written at all. Yes. It is not to be read, or rather it is not only to be read. It is to be looked at and listened to. His writing is not about something. It is that something itself, a fact that has been grasped by an eminent novelist and historian whose work is in complete opposition to Mr. Joyce's. When the senses sleep, the words go to sleep. When the sense is dancing, the words dance. Mr. Joyce's de-sophisticated language, and it's worthwhile remarking that no language is so sophisticated as English. It is just abstracted to death. It's a great, punchy little essay in defense of Finnegan's Wake, but you're also beginning to see within it, one, Beckett isn't going to be an academic. He doesn't want to play that game. And two, this interesting idea of things being recycled and old age and youth. And
well, I'll tell you what it reminded me of. It reminded me of, Nicky, you're going to be surprised by me saying this.
Is it the Beatles?
It's Bob Dylan.
Oh, damn, I got that wrong.
Bob Dylan moves to New York from nowhere and pretends to be Woody Guthrie for a while until he gets his feet, until he works out his own voice. And that's kind of what's going on with Beckett there, isn't it? Yeah. He moves from Dublin to Paris and he hangs around with Woody and until he can sing his own song. I want to ask Nicky, what did you think you were going to get when you read Beckett?
Well, having been to see Waiting for Godot, I did have a sense of, and I remember quite clearly, probably like many people who go and see Waiting for Godot with no real kind of understanding of what Beckett's like, thinking, when's stuff going to happen? You know? And then you kind of, and so I kind of had a sense of that actually it wasn't about the plot. It was about the form, and it was about the difficult situations and what comes out of those. But I still don't kind of feel like I get a sense of this is a Beckett type character, or this is a. So I'd be really interested to know more about what are the things, the themes that have come up in all of his plays.
I think the thing about reading a load of Beckett for making this program is he is a brilliant example of the artist who is in a state of becoming. You know, he's never quite arriving at the inevitable destination. I'll go on. You know, the idea that how much the work changes, also how much the work starts in this incredibly, as we'll hear in a minute, incredibly rococo language, this outpouring of words, and then gradually begins to dry up as the decades go on, moving towards silence. Nicky, also I'll add, do you know what, when asked what Waiting for Godot is about, do you know what Sir Ian McKellen said?
Isn't it about nothing twice or something like that?
No, it might well be. Sir Ian McKellen said, yes, I'll tell you what Waiting for Godot is about. It's about waiting.
Yeah.
and he wasn't being arch. He was. No. He said he says in wonderful interview, he says, that seems so obvious, but who prior to Beckett had realised it was a common thing within humanity?
Yeah.
We are all waiting for something.
I think
for something. I mean, we're feeling other things, he says, at the same time, but you know, what are we waiting for? And there's one thing, the only certainty of the things we're waiting for is at the end of the path, you know. Okay. So should we move on?
Let's move on to the next.
John, what's our next choice?
The next is a collection of 10 short stories by Samuel Beckett called More Pricks Than Kicks. And it was published in 1934 by Chatto & Windus.
More Pricks Than Kicks. This collection of short stories, his first collection of short stories, sold in its first several years of availability fewer than 500 copies.
Got a £25 advance for
and most of those were pulped.
Yeah.
So it's a very rare and valuable book, which Beckett himself was terribly reluctant to allow to be republished.
He dismissed it as juvenilia. And in some ways, maybe he's right in that it is much more, heavily Joycean than the books that he was to write afterwards. It's definitely the stories are all basically the story arc. His main character is Belacqua Shua. Belacqua was a character from Dante. He was a bit of a feckless lute maker in Dante. So he steals that name, and you follow Belacqua begins as a student, and you follow him through, living in kind of student accommodation, bed sits. He gets married 3 times in the course of this collection. Very unlike a Beckett character. He is the first, in a way, he's the first Beckett character. The book is full of verbal showing off.
Beckett characters, Beckett.
Good question, Nicky. I would say, ultimately all a character, every author's characters are them to some degree or other. But do they resemble him? Some more than others. We're going to go to Belacqua might, maybe it is, maybe.
In this one, he upset many family members.
He did.
Really?
Because he, whether it's the classic literary thing. Beckett, a man who wrote a play called Not I.
Yeah.
Or Rambo's I is another. And the idea that it is you and it isn't you, and yet at the same time, that's fine as an artist. And yet your family members can still be very disgruntled and upset that you've used them themselves, or things they'd written without their permission. It's all very well to go, I'm an artist, but you didn't ask me.
It's very smart alecky. I know you're going to read a great bit from the first story. The bit that everybody remembers is that there's a scene where a lobster is cooked in the end of Dante and the Lobster, and the line, which is a kind of, what do they call it, foreshadowing line. She lifted the lobster clear of the table. It had about 30 seconds to live. Well, thought Belacqua, it's a quick death, God help us. It is not. That's a very famous line. Still a great line.
So before we hear from our own Billy Whitelaw, Ms. Nicky Birch, who will be performing a short extract from the first story in More Pricks Than Kicks, I have to reveal now, John, would I be right in thinking that the reason why you selected More Pricks Than Kicks is it is a reference to the 1986 LP by Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Kicking Against the Pricks, because that LP contains a cover of By the Time I Get to Phoenix, which is, of course, a song written by Jimmy Webb, whose autobiography I recommended on episode 49, Backlisted on Look at Me, by Anita Bruno. And also, of course, a link to Nina Simone's Gun by Warren Ellis, which we also talked about on episode 152, which was about Deadwood by Pete Dexter. That was a good book, by the way. Deadwood by that was a wonderful book. Yeah.
Did you enjoy these stories? Enjoyment's probably the wrong word, isn't it?
Well, I'm going to take the authorial, Beckett's authorial fence. Beckett thought it was juvenilia. I found some of it very funny. The bit Nicky is going to read, I found very funny. But I also found it a bit try-hard.
Yeah.
I mean, no, I know one shouldn't say that. It's about Samuel Beckett, but he would agree with that, I think. I think he would agree with that.
I think it's curiously something slightly heartless about the
Yes.
stories. People don't read them anymore. And I think it's, if you want to kind of understand where the later stuff comes from, you can see, you wouldn't read this, indeed many people didn't, you wouldn't think this guy's going to write Waiting for Godot one day.
Well, Nicky is about to read a short section from the first story in the collection, which is called Dante and the Lobster. And this is Samuel Beckett's account of making lunch.
Lunch, to come off at all, was a very nice affair. If his lunch was to be enjoyable, and it could be very enjoyable indeed, he must be left in absolute tranquillity to prepare it. But if he were disturbed now, if some brisk tattler were to come bouncing in now, big with a big idea or a petition, he might just as well not eat at all. For the food would turn to bitterness on his palate, or worse again, taste of nothing. He must be left strictly alone. He must have complete quiet and privacy to prepare the food for his lunch. The first thing to do was to lock the door. Now nobody could come at him. He deployed an old herald and smoothed it out on the table. The rather handsome face of McCabe, the assassin, stared up at him. Then he lit the gas ring and unhooked the square, flat toaster, asbestos grill, from its nails and set it precisely on the flame. He found he had to lower the flame. Toast must not on any account be done too rapidly. We all agree with that. For bread to be toasted as ought, through and through.
It's relatable.
It must be done on a mild, steady flame. Otherwise, you only charred the outsides and left the pith as sodden as before. If there was one thing he abominated more than another, it was to feel his teeth meet in a bathos of pith and dough. And it was so easy to do the thing properly. So he thought, having regulated the flow and adjusted the grill, by the time I have the bread cut, that it'll be just right. Now the long barrel loaf came out of its biscuit tin and had its end evened off on the face of McCabe. 2 inexorable drives with the bread saw and a pair of neat rounds of raw bread. The main elements of his meal lay before him, awaiting his pleasure. The stump of the loaf went back into prison. The crumbs, as though there were no such thing as a sparrow in the wide world, were swept in a fever away, and the slices snatched up and carried to the grill. All these preliminaries were very hasty and impersonal. It was now that real skill began to be required. It was at this point that the average person began to make a hash of the entire proceedings. He laid his cheek against the soft of the bread. It was spongy and warm, alive. But he would very soon take that plush feel off it, by God, but he would very quickly take that fat white look off his face. He lowered the gas of suspicion and plapped one flabby slab plump down on the glowing fabric, but very pat and precise, so that the whole resembled the Japanese flag. Then on top, there not being room for the two do evenly side by side, and if you did not do them evenly, you might just as well save yourself the trouble of doing them at all, the other round was set to warm. When the first candidate was done, which was only when it was black through and through, it changed places with its comrade, so that now it in its turn lay on the top, done to a dead end, black and smoking, waiting till as much could be said of the other.
Oh my God!
Nicky Birch, brilliant.
Oh my God!
Billy Whitelaw would be absolutely
incredible.
Standing aside for that.
Incredible.
Amazing.
Wow. Hey, Nicky. When we asked you to do this 5 years ago, I don't think this was on the job description, was it?
And do you know what? I have to say, that was a really good passage, wasn't it?
It
He is very funny.
This is,
I mean, it's that.
Yeah.
I have to say, Dante the Lobster is a great story. I think it's a brilliant story. The bit that comes next about the gorgonzola cheese and the Savoy mustard.
Yes, it's great.
It's a book. It's one of the great sandwiches in literature.
Sandwiches in literature. But also, you can hear though, can't you, as well? That's precocious.
The relish for the language.
But it's slightly annoying. It's that kind
it's
of,
showy
look at me. Yeah, look at me do
off.
this.
He throughout the book, he peppers it with, he's always showing, words that you haven't heard before. But he was in his 20s when he wrote it.
So we'll move forward a bit now. Beckett has a difficult but good war.
Yes.
The Second World War. He is a member of the resistance. but he also heads to the south of France, to Roussillon, and spends most of the war there. But his war experiences inform what happens to his writing next. And John, I think you've chosen one of the more famous ones.
But he focuses on his literary career. It hardly becomes a stellar one. But he spent a long time trying to get the 3 novels, Malloy, Malone Dies, and finally The Unnamable, published. He finally does get them published in the early 50s. In fact, Unnamable is I think it's published in the same year, 1953, as Godot.
Not only that, within months.
Yeah, and I think it sold about 500 copies. It wasn't a massive success. What it is seen as in Beckett's development is that the Beckett character, often alone, often in the dark, often with this existential battle of wanting to say something, but then not really wanting to say something, wanting to go on, but not wanting to go on. In a way, he felt that there was a blockage that he got to in his work, in his fiction, with The Unnamable, which is, essentially it's like one very, very long kind of paragraph, really. There's a brief introduction, and then you've got pages and pages of, and it is, you're not quite sure who the character is. Is it on, does it have a body? It seems to be curled up at one moment. It's in a jar. There's another character called Mahood, another character called, as always, Madeleine. He loves his M characters. He kind of seems to claim that maybe he was the author of Malone Dies and Malloy.
It's like Nicky. It's like Russian dolls, or a box within a box within a box.
Is this when he first started to be? Do you think his brilliance came out?
Yes, for me, it's the breakthrough into using language in a new way.
Famously, in 1946, he goes back to Dublin, and the story, which actually reappears.
Is this when his mum is sick?
His mum is sick, and his dad has died, and he has a sort of an experience on the end of Dun Laoghaire Pier. It turns out he wasn't really on Dun Laoghaire Pier. He was at home when he had this experience. But something strikes him that he's been going wrong in his work. He needs to sort of move beyond the Joycean showing off, and that's when he goes back to Paris and he starts to write in French.
Right.
Completely.
So this has been written in French.
So all 3 of these novels, in fact, pretty much all of his work from the late 40s onwards, was written first in French. And Godot famously. Not one of the ones, 2 of the next ones we're talking about, which is interesting. But this was definitely, and it's seen, and his English translation caused him great. He found it very difficult to translate this book into English.
Well, I'm going to read a little bit of The Unnamable. Before I do that, I'm going to draw your attention to why I think John chose it in relation to Backlisted. The reason why John chose The Unnamable is in an act of charity to his friend and co-host Andy Miller, because it links to every single episode of Backlisted in which I introduce myself as the author of The Year of Reading Dangerously. Because I read this book as one of the 50 books that I read for The Year of Reading Dangerously. And in that book, I describe my unsuccessful first attempt, which is to try and read it on the page on a commuter train going in and out of London every day. It was I had to try and block out the rest of the carriage. So I used to listen to things like Metal Machine music on my iPod
whilst reading Samuel Beckett
in a bid to kind of just get white noise to have the space in my head to read the prose. And it wasn't very successful. I didn't really get it at all. And then I thought, okay, well, what I'll do is I'll get the audiobook and I'll listen to the audiobook. And what I decided I'd do, I'd try and listen to it in one go. Great. And this is me from The Year of Reading Dangerously, at the point at which I actually went and did this. It's so strange to read this on the page because I did actually go and do this anyway. On a Sunday morning before Christmas, I caught a train into town and took the bus to Primrose Hill. Climbing to the top, I could see the post office tower, the Snowdon aviary, and a man shaking his fist at someone who was both much taller than him and invisible. It was still early. I planned to walk across the city, down the Euston Road, paying my respects at the Midnight Bell or a few pubs like it, because I just read 20,000 Streets and the Sky, everyone, through the West End and along the river to Hammersmith or beyond. It was going to take me all day to say goodbye. For company, I had Samuel Beckett. On my iPod was an audiobook of The Unnamable, read by the actor Sean Barrett. The book ran just under 6 hours, long enough to carry me from Primrose Hill to Hammersmith. Perhaps it was cheating to listen to something the author intended to be read, but print on paper had not got me very far. I was going to try an alternative route. As I set off past the zoo and the roundhouse, along Camden High Street, past where all the record shops used to be, past the market and the Odeon Cinema on Parkway, Beckett's words murmured in my ear. They drifted around me, catching my attention, retreating, returning, insinuating themselves into my train of thought. I came here a lot once. We saw Blur at the Electric Ballroom. Compendium, the bookshop, was over there. Burroughs and Bukowski tapes, gone now. The Oxford Arms. That was where I saw Glenn Richardson perform his Todd Carty musical. Or was it an opera? On second thoughts, maybe that was the Hen and Chickens. It was all a long time ago. Some may complain that they cannot understand the Unnamable, Beckett's publisher and champion John Calder has written. But they should ask themselves how well they understand not only their own lives, but what they see when they look out at the world, how they interpret what they see, little of which could be understood anyway, and especially how they think themselves, what makes them think, what they think about and why, and how they separate what they know from everyday events from what they know from dreams. As I walked from Camden onwards, letting the Unnamable spool, I traversed not one but 3 places called London, the city I had lived in for so long, Patrick Hamilton's 20,000 Streets still humming in my mind, and this unreal city, shaped by memory and daydreams and Beckett's unravelling commentary. After a couple of miles, I had to sit down, not from fatigue, but because I was overwhelmed by what I was experiencing. In a pub I did not recognise, somewhere in limbo, I sat and nursed a pint and listened to this. I hope this preamble will soon come to an end and the statement begin that will dispose of me. Unfortunately, I am afraid, as always, of going on, for to go on means going from here, means finding me, losing me, vanishing and beginning again, a stranger first, then little by little the same as always in another place, where I shall say I have always been, of which I shall know nothing, being incapable of seeing, moving, thinking, speaking, but of which little by little, in spite of these handicaps, I shall begin to know something, just enough for it to turn out to be the same place as always, the same which seems made for me and does not want me, which I seem to want and do not want. Take your choice, which spews me out or swallows me up, I'll never know, which is perhaps merely the inside of my distant skull where once I wandered, now am fixed, lost for tininess, or straining against the walls with my head, my hands, my feet, my back, and ever murmuring my old stories, my old story as if it were the first time. So there is nothing to be afraid of. And yet I am afraid of what my words will do to me, to my refuge yet again. Is there really nothing new to try?
Amazing. It is amazing. Brilliantly read as well, Andy. Beautiful.
It's a very strange feeling.
The context of that was really useful as well.
Yeah, right. It's a really interesting, you know, the thing Calder says there, I remember when I was putting this chapter together, is that brilliant observation. Think to yourself, how well do you actually know the reality of what you perceive? And if you're not certain, what is contained in the uncertainty? That's sort of what he's writing about there, I think.
I mean, it's the stripping away of everything, of plot, of agency, of other characters. You know, there is no narrative in this book. But what there is this extraordinary language. It's complete. And the bit of the Harold Pinter that you heard right at the beginning of the podcast was him. That was the very end of the novel. The famous "I'll go on."
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Hey, it's Bill Simmons from the Bill Simmons Podcast. The NBA playoffs are here, and Michelob Ultra is getting you closer to the game than ever with courtside seats and more. Enter now at michelobultra.com/courtside. Michelob Ultra Superior Access Courtside 2024 to 2025 sweepstakes. No purchase necessary. Open to U.S. residents 21 or older. Ends on July 1st, 2025. Multiple entry periods. Visit michelobultra.com/superior access/courtside for free entry deadlines and official rules. Message and data rates may apply. Void where prohibited.
Hard to believe I was ever that young. Well, the voice, Jesus, and the aspirations, and the resolutions. To drink less in particular. Statistics. 1,700 hours out of the preceding 8,000 odd consumed on licensed premises alone, more than 20%, say 40% of his waking life. Plans for a less engrossing sexual life. Last illness of his father, flagging pursuit of happiness, unattainable laxation, sneers at what he calls his youth, and thanks to God it's over. Fourth ring there, huh? Shadows of the opus magna. Closing with the yet to Providence. What remains of all that misery? A girl in a shabby green coat on a railway station platform? No?
Oh, okay. Welcome back, everybody. Now, I don't know why John Mitchinson would choose for Backlisted this episode a text in which an old man rakes through recordings from his past. I don't know what he was thinking, but that is an excerpt from Krapp's last tape by Samuel Beckett, performed by Patrick McGee, the actor for whom that piece was written. Yeah. It is my favourite thing by Beckett, Krapp's last tape. I'm so happy that you chose it, John.
It is my favourite thing by Beckett, and I can prove I've got the 18-year-old undergraduate me.
Incredible looking.
Oh my goodness!
Here is my essay, which is called "The Things to Say About Krapp's Last Tape." That's what I called it. And then underneath,
you know what?
And underneath,
you should have taped this so we could play it back.
I've got underneath it says, "Literature is like phosphorus. It shines with its maximum brilliance when it attempts to die." Roland Barthes, Writing Degree 0, 1953. Which is like, that was the year not only was I obsessed with Beckett, that was the year I also read Roland Barthes for the first time. So,
and what did your teacher say about this essay?
Well, she said, "This is embarrassing.
Oh no, please."
But since you asked, she said, "How could I impose a mark on such intelligent and artistic creativity? An A+ for what go down on the books. This is a delight to perceive," as the remark in the play goes. "I hope you'll manage such heights in the exam, John." Which, I don't know, I think
I've got to tell listeners that John is hugging the tape player and crying while he listens to himself read that.
I love the fact that you still have your English essay from...
Oh, that's amazing. I want to... Come on, John, we'll each take turn. You go last. Yeah. But I want to start with Nicky now. I know you'd never seen this before.
Yeah.
And there are several incredible performances of Krapp's last tape available now on YouTube. If you want to see McGee, for whom it was written, perform it, there's a wonderful BBC production from the early 1970s. If you want to see the playwright Harold Pinter perform Krapp's last tape, very near the end of his life. That is very
in a wheelchair,
very moving, very moving,
very powerful.
And if you want to see John Hurt, the late John Hurt, filmed 2001. That's on YouTube, and that is the version I recommended to you because I think that's my favourite. What did you make of it?
Yeah, I thought it was actually incredible. That was incredible, isn't it? As a premise, as well as it made me just think, fucking hell, he's a good actor. You know, like, that was like the first thing.
Yes,
like, that was a real sort of, oh no, he really can act.
Yeah,
but you,
no, but also just just for those you, if anyone doesn't know it, if you were like me, a novice, the premise of an old man listening back is on his birthday, listening back to to tapes that he's made, recordings of himself previously made on his birthday. Because like it feels like that, an annual thing that he does. He makes these tapes and looks back, and then he's making a new one. And he every time he seems to sort of be more and more bitter, and he's listening back to these tapes. And sometimes he's listening back to tapes where he's listening back to old tapes.
Yeah.
And which is such a clever premise. And as a sort of podcast editor, I'm so interested in this because quite often you hear these brilliant podcasts where they're having to think about how you bring in tape.
Yeah.
And how you bring in, like they have to come up with formats and form where you're having to bring in old tape. And this is actually the sort of perfect example of one that he's done.
And that hearing him laugh along with his past self.
Yeah.
You know, all of Beckett's about creating company for himself.
Right.
You know, the characters are always creating
there's sort
company.
Of three characters in this, isn't there? You know, there's himself and now himself before and himself even earlier. And he seems to be this sort of hilariously another bitter author kind of reflecting
books
on an
about
unsuccessful
books.
life. You know,
It's about books.
Sold 11 copies.
Yeah.
Just circulating library.
But he feels like he shouldn't be listening to these tapes, but he does. He's like, I know I shouldn't do this.
Well, he's like everybody who watches, videos now of things that of their lost girlfriends or their old. You know, it's addictive behaviour. He keeps.
Well, look, I was watching I watched like 3 or 4 versions of this on successive days, and then stumbled over a tweet of mine from 3 or 4 years ago. And looked at it and thought, I don't remember writing. I don't remember the things that happened in that. Suddenly, we've all built these little archives of ourselves, like Krapp's last tape. Like, you know,
I found it so interesting because he's listening to them, knowing that it's painful listening to them, and yet making another recording, knowing that at some point he might listen to that, and that's going to be painful. It's like he knows it's going to be awful.
Yeah, the thing I found watching them again, particularly, I think actually the reason why I like Hurt's performance so much. Beckett wrote Krapp's last tape inspired by Patrick McGee's cracked voice, he said. So he wrote it because he wanted to hear McGee's voice say those words, and contrast the man in his pomp, in his prime, with the more decrepit individual. But actually the great gift of Krapp's last tape that Beckett gives to any actor who plays it is how much of the time they say nothing. They are listening to and reacting and telling you how to feel about what you're hearing. And when you watch McGee, there's these incredible close-ups of his, you know, he's sweating and he's clearly traumatized by it. Whereas Hurt gives off this different sense of the aging man. Yeah. He seems bewildered to me. This sense of being lost. He's lost in whatever space.
Yeah.
Apparently Gambon was amazing as Krapp.
And
also
Max Wall.
Max Wall was another. But I think that the pathos is the thing that is so overwhelming. And the end of the play, which the 18-year-old me said, at the end of the play, at the end of his last tape, its silence becomes audible. It flows on passively like time. Thus, paradoxically, the darkness exists only as an absence of light, silence as an absence of sound, and solitude as absence of company. By venturing into the dark, Krapp is made aware of his light. By speaking, he realizes silence. and by devising company acknowledges that he is alone. Krapp is alone. The dust is his.
And what do you think of that 18-year-old self's quote now?
I think it's pretty good. It's quite a bit, it's a bit pretentious, but I mean,
pretty good.
I mean,
it's very good, John. Come on. I think
I love this. I love this play more than almost any other. And what's that thing we used to have where you have Rachel and I always say, "Not with the fire in me now." That's just one of that's one of our lines.
Yeah.
So what are you doing? No, not with the fire in me now.
Yeah. Oh, what you mean? Phrases one just says around the house.
Yeah.
I voted for you as an independent candidate.
Exactly. That's it.
Just drop a Beckettian phrase.
Not with the fire in me now.
So I've got a few little clips from
I thought it might be time for a quiz.
So yeah, it's definitely quiz time. I've got a few clips from our archive. Things that we didn't record on our birthday.
That's
but
young
let's
whelp.
assume, yes, let's pretend it was our birthday, given it's going to be.
What's the quiz element, please?
The quiz is I have got a few clips of you guys talking about books from the Backlisted archive. And you're going to listen to yourself, and you're going to try and work out what book you're talking about.
Oh no!
Okay.
Yeah. Great.
Okay.
This is too meta.
Oh, go on.
This could be really tricky.
Go on.
This is clip one.
Also, you would have to say, but that because this was her first novel, it's held together. Not by craft, though there is craft in it, but just her talent. It's held together by her energy and her talent.
Any thoughts on that?
Andy and I are looking at each other with no idea.
Luckily, I have another clip to help you out on that one.
Really?
Yeah. Okay.
Is it the same?
It's the same
book?
one. Yeah. It's a little bit, making it a little bit easier.
She manages to do that thing, again, I think through force of personality, really, of telling you a story where you want to know what happens next. Okay, well, that's what you want from a novel. But also being very thoughtful, philosophically thoughtful, and also being quite weird. And as we said, the novel takes a very peculiar twist at the halfway point. Also funny. I mean, it's so funny. It's so brilliantly turned in terms of phrase for phrase.
It's Lolly Willows by Sylvia Townsend Warner.
It is Lolly Willows.
Whoa, thank you, John.
Well done.
Save my blushes.
Okay, are you ready for question 2?
Okay, go on.
Douglas Adams' description of Woodhouse as pure word music. Mm-hmm. And at her best, you can feel her when she writes, getting into kind of that kind of flow where the words are beginning to form this beautiful, light kind of andante of humour and intelligence kind pushing the thing along.
I'm like Patrick McGee sweating at this point. Traumatized by this. I'm going to say...
Because we don't listen back to the show.
Shall I play another one for that?
Go on.
Yeah, go on.
She has a positive moral message to make about the value of sex and about the value of relationships and the importance of kindness and the importance of love in relationships. And that to be in her world is a very comforting and reassuring.
She's a really good author to read at times of stress.
The clue there is she's a really good author to read in times of stress. There was a really moving discussion that we had about this, about an author who can talk about sex, but also in times of stress.
Elizabeth Jane Howard?
No. With a Cambridge professor.
Jilly Cooper.
Yeah.
It's Jilly Cooper.
Of course it's Jilly Cooper.
Okay.
Pure word music. Well done, Andy Miller.
Okay, one more.
We always say this on Backlisted when it's true, and in this case it is true rather than the ecstatic truth. It's the actual truth. This isn't like any other book. No. Most books are like other books, but this one isn't. And that in itself is a reason for reading it.
It's like a kind of trippy fairy tale.
It's like a trippy fairy tale.
Is it Vet's daughter, Barbara Cummings?
No, it's not.
I think is so brilliant. You've created a Beckettian loop, Nicky, where you've got me saying, we say this all the time on Backlisted, this is a book that's not like other books. A phrase I've used over and over again.
I haven't got another clip for that. But all I can say is, I'll give you a little clue.
Sorry.
It's one of John's best impressions.
Oh, it's one of John's best impressions. Oh no!
It's a book by a woman.
It's not a book by a woman.
I tell you what, that makes me think of. It makes me think of John's reading from Ulverton live on stage at End of the Road,
good.
which was one of the most amazing things he's ever done.
Is it trippy though? Trippy.
Oh.
So I'm going to tell you.
Oh, go on.
It's Werner Herzog.
Oh no! I was End of the Road. I was just one. That was it. Oh no!
That was very close.
Oh,
same festival.
Oh,
I think isn't there a new? I think very much there is a new a book, a novel. I think not a novel, a memoir. I think
It's a memoir.
Which we are looking forward to greatly on Backlisted. Right.
We better crack on, guys. We're going to get kicked out.
Oh, okay. I mean, so John, what have you set up for us as the final text?
The final text I have set up is Company, which was published in 1980. And the reason I chose this was that I was at university writing this essay in 1981. And the idea of a new book, he hadn't written a work of fiction novel for something like 20 years. And it was that amazing feeling thinking, oh my God, like you're saying about Bob Dylan on stage. Samuel Beckett is out there somewhere still writing. I mean, this man who knew Joyce, this great 20th century Nobel Prize winner.
The 80s, he's still there.
He was a very handsome old man as well.
For a recluse, he was a gentleman of whom there is thousands of photographs looking great.
But have you seen the sexy shots in Tangiers when he was on holiday?
Yeah.
And there's a film just released today. It's the 3rd of November, which is about, he lived with Suzanne, his partner, but he did have an affair with his translator, Barbara Bray. And the film apparently they've given him the full Hollywood treatment. He was a hero of the resistance, and he's got women fighting over. I can't imagine. Gabriel Byrne plays Beckett. I'm kind of intrigued to see what they've done.
Let's go and see it.
We should.
Yeah, we should go from this.
But
place.
Company is and Company was written in English, as Krapp's last take was, which was almost nothing he wrote towards the end of his life was written in English. And it is another book where he revisits his childhood. He revisits the death of his mother, his father. It's really beautiful, a complex book, but I mean, I think with Krapp, it's right up there.
Well, I assumed that you had chosen Company because it's, of course, the name of one of Stephen Sondheim's finest musicals. And in fact, the Sondheim musical is not based on the Beckett novella. And we covered Sondheim's books in episode 155 in 2022. But also, I wondered, John, sentimentally, whether you had chosen Company because perhaps the nicest thing, I think, for the three of us making Backlisted in the last 8 years is how much we have enjoyed one another's company, talking about books, particularly during the period of the pandemic. I know I can say that those recordings we made during the darkest times of COVID were so important to me. Completely. To feel a connection to the world and talk about something else and not be frightened for an hour or two. And so when you recommended Company, I was thinking, I had that idea in my head. And I'd never read this before. Yeah. It's incredible.
Yeah.
It's one of those times you think, oh yeah, okay. This amazing book, this short book, which we think of as late work by the famous writer Samuel Beckett, is actually an extraordinary. You need know nothing about Beckett.
Completely.
Nothing about Beckett's life in the terms we've described it, to pick this up, read it, be deeply moved by it. The contrast between the prose in this, John, and the prose Nicky read so adeptly from More Kicks Than Pricks.
Yeah.
You know, the move towards silence, and Beckett using rhythm and repetition and plain speaking. I found it tremendously moving. So thank you very, very much. Thank you so much.
I'm pleased that there is just a note of lyricism, which I think kind of connects back to that lyricism that is in Krapp as well. And I would say on the company thing, I think, Beckett is all about whatever else is left, we always create another. We always, whether it's a voice on a tape, or our own voice or our memories, we have to, human beings cannot exist in a vacuum. And no writer has pursued that thought more kind of courageously and relentlessly than Beckett. But I think this is, of all the late Beckett works, this is the one I go back to. Do you want me to read a little bit?
Yes, please.
You take pity on a hedgehog out in the cold and put it in an old hat box with some worms. This box with the hog inside you then place in a disused hutch, wedging the door open for the poor creature to come out and go at will, to go in search of food and having eaten to regain the warmth and security of its box in the hutch. There then is the hedgehog in its box in the hutch, with enough worms to tide it over. A last look to make sure all as it should be before taking yourself off to look for something else to pass the time, heavy already on your hands at that tender age. The glow at your good deed is slower than usual to cool and fade. You glowed readily in those days, but seldom for long. Hardly had the glow been kindled by some good deed on your part, or by some little triumph over your rivals, or by a word of praise from your parents or mentors, when it would begin to cool and fade, leaving you in a very short time as chill and dim as before, even in those days. But not this day. It was on an autumn afternoon you found the hedgehog and took pity on it in the way described, and you were still the better for it when your bedtime came. Kneeling at your bedside, you included in it the hedgehog in your detailed prayer to God to bless all you loved. And tossing in your warm bed, waiting for sleep to come, you were still faintly glowing at the thought of what a fortunate hedgehog it was to have crossed your path as it did. A narrow clay path, edged with sear box edging. As you stood there, wondering how best to pass the time till bedtime, it parted the edging on one side and was making straight for the edging on the other when you entered its life. Now, the next morning, not only was the glow spent, but a great uneasiness had taken its place, a suspicion that all was perhaps not as it should be. That rather do as you did, you had perhaps better let good alone and the hedgehog pursue its way. Days, if not weeks, passed before you could bring yourself to return to the hutch. You've never forgotten what you found there. You were on your back in the dark and have never forgotten what you found then. The mush, the stench.
And now the tape has run out. We'd love to go on, but there is no more time. Thank you for listening. If you want show notes with clips, links, and suggestions for further reading for this show, and the 198 that we've already recorded, please visit our website at backlisted.fm. If you want to buy the books discussed, you can, of course, visit our shop at bookshop.org and choose Backlisted as your bookshop. And we're still keen to hear from you on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, Pigeon Post, however you can reach us, please do. Reel to reel.
If you want to hear Backlisted early and without ads, subscribe to our Patreon.
www.patreon.com/backlisted.
Your subscription brings other benefits. If you subscribe at the lot listener level, for the price of a bunch of fair trade bananas, you'll get not one, but 2 extra exclusive podcasts every month. We call it Locklisted, because it began in the When Lock Tavern just before lockdown, and it features the three of us talking and recommending the books, films, and music we've enjoyed in the previous fortnight. For those of you who enjoy our What Have You Been Reading slot, that's where you'll now find it. Plus, lot listeners get their names read out, accompanied by lashings of thanks and gratitude like this.
Philip Hill, thank you. Martine, Harry Hornby, Peter Office, and Stephen Marsden. Oh, there's some more. Robert Selkov, thank you so much. Bill W.
Thank you, Bill W.
Mark O'Neill, Rachel Wensley, and thank you very much, Chris Forston.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys. Thanks so much. John, that was one of the most incredible readings, and we're all very moved sitting here in the studio. So there you go. Also, John's very ill. Hopefully that won't be the last time you hear from him. That would be a terrible... That's all right, John.
Not with the fire in me now.
Don't go.
Not with the fire in me now, Andy.
So that's what I want to say. This has just been, this has been a gift. This whole podcast is a gift in our lives, and this show has been wonderful. Thank you so much, both of you. Nicky.
I just want to thank you for introducing me to and making me kind of come on board, because I just wouldn't
You were
experience.
really windy earlier, weren't you? But hasn't it been amazing?
It's been fantastic. And I think, it's just that whole thing about enthusiasm brings people with you. And you've done that with me. So thank you so much.
Beautiful. John Mitchinson.
Well, the last thing I wanted to say, I just wanted to share a little thing. When I left Waterstones, just to show, they bought me a little edition minuit of Beckett Cette Fois. And it is little signed by Sam himself.
He's in the room with us now. Wow, what an incredible thing.
Sam Beckett. It says Sam Beckett.
It does indeed.
Little
say Samuel
pamphlet.
Beckett. So they're one of my most precious books. So
wonderful.
And I think obviously the next one is the big one, 200. We're going to sign off, but we are going to leave you with a little bit of Sam.
So thanks all for listening. We'll see you next time. 200th show. See you in a fortnight. And I just said he was in the room. Let's listen to the tape. Let's hug the tape recorder and listen.
Samuel Beckett himself. Very rare recording of him reading from his novel What, the poem.
Was will not abase one just, but of was, of the coming to, of the being as, of the going from, not habitat, of the long way, of the short stay, of the going back home the way he had come, of the empty heart, of the empty hands, of the dim mind wayfaring through barren lands, of a flame with dark winds hedged about, going out, gone out, of the empty heart, of the empty hands, of the dark mind stumbling through barren lands. That is of what will not abase one toss.